Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is useful human Arif Hassan. Arif, how was training camp today? Did you get your water wings or did you float away for a little bit?
It actually didn't rain at all during camp, just before practice, up until like 2 minutes before practice, so it's a good thing they pushed it back, and after practice, like 2 minutes after practice. So it did not rain during practice. The rain also didn't cool anything down, so it was just insanely hot.
So it was just misery all around, and then it got wet, and then it was more misery.
Yeah, I've never been unintentionally this warm and this cold in the same day.
Normally, if you're looking for like that sort of cold humanity, you just turn on Twitter for a little while and just
yeah, just let the rage and the cold takes take over.
just sitting in front of an air conditioner. I'm just getting cold here. Welcome to this week's show. We have plenty of stuff to talk about, including previewing an actual game. By God, it's happening. This might actually be real. So we got a lot of stuff to talk about. We're doing some training camp thoughts. We'll be talking about the preseason game against New Orleans and a fantastic mailbag. But before we do, just want to thank you guys so much for listening and helping out over the years. We are in the middle of a fantastic season for Vikings content. So just want to thank you guys so much. And if you enjoy the show, if you hear value in what we are producing for you, you can go to patreon.com/NorseCode, or you can go to paypal.me/NorseCode and give a quick donation if you'd like to give $1, $3.50 to help keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay. Whatever you'd like to give, we would certainly appreciate it. Help help keep the lights on, helps keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay, helps keep us ad free. So if you enjoy the show, just throw us a couple of bucks there. Maybe share a link on social media, Facebook, Twitter, whatever the kids are using, Instagram or whatever. Do what you got to do. Like I say Instagram, like I don't have a terrible Instagram account for myself.
Your Insta snaps and your TikToks.
All your TikToks. I don't know if there's got to be some outdated.
Kids these days.
You can watch us on MySpace Video. Like, is that still a thing?
Search us on Alta Vista. We'll pop right up.
We have a special deal with Ask Jeeves. We'll talk about that later. Speaking of special deals, Arif, let's talk about the training camp guide.
Yeah, so if you head over to theathletic.com, unfortunately the promo code has expired. I'm sure there's another one I can find. But yeah, head over to theathletic.com, subscribe. You can get access to scouting reports on all of the players in training camp except for the specialists. So that's too bad. But yeah, if you want to learn, well, I guess except for like Tyler Catalina, I don't have a scouting report on him up, or Bene Beniquary, but
oversights on your point. It's clearly an oversight.
Yeah, I didn't anticipate the Vikings signing them after I wrote the article, which is really on me. But we've got scouting reports on all the players in training camp, as well as just published today an all NFC North preseason team. So I asked members of the 3 other beats in the NFC North to vote on a poll. I also voted to determine kind of who would make, the all conference team. Which is a thing that we're like very comfortable and familiar with in high school. It's something that we see a lot of in college, all Big 12 and all that. And then we just don't see that in the NFL. So we decided to do it. The preseason all NFC North team. I don't know if we're going to do an after season all NFC North team, but it's content, so I don't see why not. And so, we have the Thielen Diggs Devontae debate. We have a logjam at some positions. It's fun. But yeah, we've got a bunch of stuff. Chad has a bunch of great stuff about like Dalvin Cook and Brandon Zylstra up on The Athletic over the past 2 weeks. So yeah, we've got a ton of training camp related content for you.
So I was going to ask, just because it had been mentioned in the Twitter responses last week, if you had a chance to dunk on Davante Adams or not in the Thielen Adams or Diggs Adams debate.
But dunk? Sorry, that sounded so old. What do you mean dunk?
Wow, that'll be the oldest thing you say this episode, probably.
Yeah. No, it was just like, in what context would that, I just say that Diggs is better or whatever?
As far as I can tell, that's all it takes for Green Bay fans to get upset, is just to mention how much better both Thielen and Diggs are than Davante Adams, even though he is some sort of quote unquote elite wide receiver in their eyes.
I mean, okay, so obviously I think Diggs and Thielen are better. So my ballot was Diggs 1, Thielen 2, Adams 3, Galladay 4, Robinson 5, because Robinson hasn't done anything in a little bit. I think everybody else in the NFC North voted Thielen 1 and then Diggs 2 or 3, with Davante Adams being 2. I don't think Davante Adams earned a 1 from anybody. I should double check that, because otherwise people are going to be mad at the Packers beat writer.
You don't want to be called a hack for lying on your own podcast about something that was being written on an article that has your name on it.
Yeah, it's never happened before.
No, it'd be a terrible idea. Why would anyone do something like that? Misrepresentation and whatnot.
On the internet?
Is that a thing? I don't know if that's a thing.
God, I want to do the old bit for the whole episode.
No, because I will unintentionally do it the entire episode. This will be, in fact, the name of it will just end up being the old episode, and we'll just deal with it from there. This is the episode where James aged 20 years in the span of an hour and a half.
Why can't I see any? Oh, it's under drive.google.com, not sheets.google. That's dumb. Wow, okay, that is old. No, it's not a bit anymore.
This is more intervention than bit now.
How do the tabs? There's tabs on the top. I get, but the tabs on the bottom.
Arif, we're here for you, and we understand, but the number of Excel spreadsheets that you have open at any point in time is a problem.
By the way, do you want me to count right now how many I have open? It's 23.
I like how you didn't even need to count. You just had the answer, and in a weird, that's a weird way to flex, but okay sort of way. Yeah, okay.
I know. Yeah. So actually, I'm wrong. The Packers beat writer did do his due diligence and voted Davante Adams first. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so I had Adam Thielen 2. The Packers beat writer had Adam Thielen 2, and then the Lions and Bears beat writer had Adam Thielen 1. And then, of course, number 1 for me was Diggs, because I will maintain that I think he's a better receiver, despite the fact that he has never produced Adam Thielen on a per-game or per-season basis. That makes me sound insane.
Well, you just believe in heart more than numbers, which makes you an anti.
Look, I just like grinding the film, okay? Football is not played on any of my 23 spreadsheets.
That might be my favorite quote of the season so far. So...
sorry, do people want training camp updates in this episode? Our bad. We didn't even put training camp in the show notes. That's, wow. Whoops.
Yeah, it was just pretend to be old. Arif has problems. Mention there's no football played on Arif spreadsheets. Okay, well, let's... All
right, to the middle. No, let's talk about training camp.
We can talk about training camp in just a second. We need to talk about the Fantasy Football League.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah, let's do that. And we have a ton of entries. Normal.
We have a ton of entries. There is still time for you to get yours in. Yes, you, listener, you can get your entry in by going on Twitter and direct messaging norsecodepodcast, which is the Norse Code Twitter account, or you can send an email to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com and just mention you'd like to be put into the pool. And we will be drawing names in about 2 weeks to see who makes it in. The 2 people who won last year are automatically automatically put back in. And then it's Arif, Dusty, and myself, and then just a whole bunch of people who want to be hurt. Emotionally, physically, whatever. Just they're ready for the pain of the kicker experience. So
if you're lucky, I'll remember when the draft is and be present and draft a worse team than Yahoo would have.
If you're lucky.
Yeah, if you're lucky. If you're unlucky, I won't be there, and I'll draft apparently a dominant team.
I control these waiver wires. I run these waiver wires like a marathon. Yeah, so if you would like to experience the hatred for kickers the way that only you can in a league with a negative 25-point extra point rule, you can send an email to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com or send a Twitter DM to norsecodedn. All right, all shilling is finished. Let's talk about training camp. General thoughts over the last week?
General thoughts. The team looks good, James.
Excellent. We can wrap up now. Right. Let's go to the mailbag and talk about jam and jellies.
I hope that's. I haven't checked the mailbag yet. I hope that's there. Okay. So, general thoughts on training camp. It's generally pretty difficult to evaluate players in training camp. You have this challenge every year. I've downloaded a bunch of video from training camp that I haven't been able to break down in terms of the film yet. So these are all unconfirmed observations and thoughts. I think that wide receiver depth is probably a concern. I'll say that. I think that, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a little bit. I'm not loving the quarterback situation. Talk about that in a little bit more detail. I think the offense looks pretty interesting. I'm writing a piece about kind of the offensive design that seems to be developing because the Vikings ran these plays before videography from media was banned, which they do that every year. They after a certain amount of practices, ban video during team drills for the media. So that's not unusual or anything. But I don't think they'll push back against the fact that I'll be writing about some of the more interesting plays I've seen. So there's some interesting kind of thoughts developing there about that. Defensively, I really like what I've seen out of Xavier Rhodes, which I think is kind of a concern people have, but also not one that people talk about that much, right? How is Xavier Rhodes going to play? He's had a down year. It's not like the year before it was his best year ever, which actually I do push back against that a little bit in my training camp guide. It's a down year for him. I don't think it's a down year for a cornerback. So he wasn't playing at a Pro Bowl level. The Vikings are kind of expecting him to and paying him a little like that. So I understand that there's still frustration there. I don't want to say that, it doesn't make sense not to be mad at a guy who gives a big plays because he gets injured. Or mad at the situation. Maybe don't get mad at a guy for getting injured, but you know what I mean? But I think that he's looked really good in training camp. So I think that that's a big positive. Mackenzie Alexander, I think, has looked pretty good. Just generally speaking, I think that defensively, as you would expect, a lot of the things that look good do look good. Worries about defensive regression. Obviously, it's just camp, so those worries should still be there. But a lot of times we see signs of some of the stuff that ends up playing out into the season in training camp. And I don't think I've seen any of those signs from the defenders that we expect to kind of carry the load. So that's pretty good. Garrett Bradbury kind of, in terms of the draft picks, I think Irv Smith's a little behind where he should be. Bradbury's about where he should be. He doesn't look like he's, the next, all-pro first-round center or anything like that, but he doesn't look like he's lost either. Madison has taken the running back 2 spot. We'll talk about that in a second too. And Drew Samia looks like he's on the third string, and I think he looks good for a third stringer, but if you move him to the second string, he looks like he would struggle. So, and Cameron Smith, 5th round pick, I really like what I've seen out of him. So kind of just a general impressions, then we can dig into kind of the specifics in a second.
Well, let's talk about the quarterback position. And so what do you feel is kind of going wrong with how they're playing right now?
Yeah, well, so I think that from a backup perspective, so first I'll talk about the backups. The backups are just overwhelmingly disappointing. Sean Mannion kind of makes the wrong decisions every so often. Past couple of days have looked a little bit better, but then he did throw a pick six at a blitzing linebacker like today. He struggled in 2-minute, which, I mean, that's like, at this point, that's like a common thread for Vikings quarterbacks since like 2016. But yeah, they have had issues. I think that the biggest issue for Slaughter and Browning is deep downfield accuracy. It's very difficult for them to threaten. Browning has also had some issues throwing short. It's been kind of frustrating. He throws behind screens and stuff like that. So I would say that despite the fact that both are struggling, Slaughter is probably ahead of Browning. In my estimation, it looks like on the depth chart they released he is, even though he's taking the fewest reps of any of the quarterbacks. Mannion, he just does not look good. He's got a very strong arm. That's kind of it. And it's not like it's like Cam Newton, Josh Allen level strong. It's just like quite strong. And then Cousins, I don't think that he's taking advantage of opportunities that are there, which is kind of the criticism that we had before the season anyway. So this could either be confirmation bias or evidence that, he's not improving in the ways that you'd want him to improve. I don't want to compare Cousins' quarterback issues with the quarterback issues of the others, because it's very obvious that he's better than them, right? I mean, he's an above average quarterback and they're backup, so he should be better than him, and it's very obvious that he is. He's getting sacked a lot, which maybe says a lot about the O-line, but I think it also says a lot about his ability to get rid of the ball quickly in these situations. Now, in games, he seems to get rid of the ball a lot quicker, so maybe that's part of it. But I don't love what I've seen. I see, maybe a little too many checkdowns and stuff like that. And that's what he said he was going to work on heading into camp, that he would trust Kyle Rudolph more because Rudolph is the kind of player that can be open when he's not open, and that he would just trust his receivers more generally to be open in situations where it's a little bit tighter. So we're not seeing that yet. Maybe part of it is just in situations where you're throwing in tight coverage, a player's more likely to get injured, and you don't want players to get injured in training camp. I don't know. But from what we've seen, it's good, not great quarterback play. And then sometimes he just throws a bad ball here or there, like the underthrow that I tweeted out and stuff like that.
Now, when you talk about the check down issue, is this more of a situation of just, like you had said, do you worry that this is just more trying to be more careful during preseason, or do you think there's something else there?
It's training camp. Try to make plays. I think that, if that's the philosophy he's taking or that they're taking as an offensive staff together, I don't like it at all. I think you should try to make plays and see what you can do, see what you can get away with. Because I think in order to kind of trust your receivers to win in tight coverage or figure out who can do what in situations where it's difficult, in order to figure that out, you got to put them in those situations. So if you're just declining coverage because of coverage, you're not testing out what you can do and maximizing the ability to make explosive plays. If he was making if he was throwing a bunch of interceptions in coverage that happens to be tight, I'd actually be a little bit less worried. But yeah, it's not something I like. I will say that the offense does look good in the red zone. It's looked good in the red zone for the past 2 weeks. So that's great. That's a huge improvement. The Vikings haven't been good in the red zone in ages. So I'll say that's great. Thielen is consistently winning in the red zone, which is kind of an issue he had 2 years ago. Diggs is consistently winning in the red zone. And then Rudolph is getting better targets in the red zone, because Rudolph was the most targeted player in the red zone last year, and he was not super efficient on them, which is interesting because he still ended up with 7 touchdowns or something like that. He converted his red zone opportunities into touchdowns, but he had so many opportunities, and I don't think it's on him. I think it's on Cousins. And those opportunities are looking better in camp. So I'll say that is an area of improvement that I like. But man, they suck at situational drills.
Well, let's move over to the running back position real quick, and especially the running back 2 and 3 battle. How is that going?
Yeah, so I really like what I've seen out of Alexander Mattison. Normal caveat about camp applies, but especially to running backs who aren't tackled to the ground in Vikings camp or in most camps. Some camps, they'll tackle you to the ground. I think Ravens do it. but he doesn't get, running backs, Madison, for example, don't get taken to the ground. So you don't get to see the whole of everything you might want to see in camp to kind of determine who's doing what. But I really like the vision I've seen from Madison. He shows a little bit more acceleration than you'd expect from his combine testing, and I think that's reflected in his pro day. Like he ran a 4.62 or something at his combine. He ran a 4.56 at his pro day. That very clearly, more accurately represents the kind of running back he is. He's not a 4.3 guy or anything like that. That's pretty obvious, but he shows pretty good acceleration and stuff like that. So I like seeing what I've seen out of him. He's a fairly smooth mover at times, which is kind of cool to see. But yeah, for the most part, he looks like he can be a running back too. Dalvin, I mentioned, I think earlier that he had in previous camps this tremendous fluidity that was obvious and difficult to quantify and just so clear that you just wanted to talk about it. And how I wasn't seeing that in camp. I said that last week. I'm seeing a little bit more of it, I guess, in camp. But he's just not taking many reps. And so not seeing a ton of Dalvin Cook is more, I just think the staff is being cautious. I don't think he has any injuries that'll keep him out during the season, but I think they just don't want to overburden him during training camp. But, I mean, he does look really fast.
Well, what everyone's here for is the wide receiver 3 battle, so let's go through it.
Yeah, well, it's between Chad Beebe and Jordan Taylor. The coaching staff really loves Chad Beebe. I don't. He hasn't had a day in practice yet where he hasn't dropped a pass. Sometimes 2, maybe even 3 passes. And given the number of reps that you have, that's a lot. He can make some impressive catches that would not look impressive to a normal height receiver. So he has to reach out of his frame sometimes. And also Sean Mannion's accuracy is not amazing or anything like that. So I don't think he's performing that well. I mean, he's getting open. He's really quick, especially against the second team offense. He has a lot more trouble against Mackenzie Alexander, but he is He's dropping the ball a lot. And then he also has issues separating downfield. That was pretty clear, especially during the night practice when they would just send everybody downfield. He gets open underneath. That's very clear. He can catch a lot of passes. He holds onto the ball through contact. That's great. But I don't love what I've seen. Jordan Taylor has also not super impressed. I think he's maybe more valuable, but I don't think he's super impressed or anything. He's quicker than you'd expect someone who's 6'5" to be, but he just has trouble getting open. Kind of the opposite problem with BB. And then you kind of want him to have stronger hands if he's always going to be in contested catch situations. And so that's just kind of where it is. And so, yeah, that's kind of why I think the wide receivers have a depth issue. Zimmer already called out all the rookie receivers, who are essentially the rest of the receivers on the roster, and plus Laquan Treadwell. And they have not impressed. Treadwell has looked pretty good against the threes. That doesn't really mean much. But the other rookie receivers, they just, every time they have a day where they look good, they've got a day that looks awful the next one. So, BC Johnson today dropped 3 passes, and then he also made the 3 best plays. You're just you don't know what to do with that. Dylan Mitchell clearly has speed to get downfield, but he's not a very good route runner, and he'll drop the ball every so often. Davion Davis is he has struggles separating. I mean, I think he looks good, and I think he should kind of move up the chart. But, it's clear that the coaches don't think a ton of him. And then Alexander Hollins, he's quick, but that's about it.
And finally, of course, the offensive line. How's that coming together?
This is maybe the first day Josh Klein has had where he hasn't looked stellar, which is fine. I really like what I've seen out of Klein. Before Brian O'Neill's injury, and we'll see tomorrow how bad that injury is, he looked mostly good. Danielle Hunter was still beating up on him a lot, but, that's Danielle Hunter. Every time he went up against anyone else, which admittedly not too often in camp, but every time he went up against anyone else, he looked good. And I think, just generally speaking, he looked better than he did look in camp last year. So I kind of like what I'm seeing out of him. Bradbury, he looks good and bad. There are days where he just gets blown up a lot and days where he looks really good. Rep to rep, it changes. Elflein is much more up and down, especially down. He has some pretty awful days. Whereas Bradbury will get blown up by Jaleel Johnson in one-on-ones and then do okay in team drills. Elflein is just having a lot of trouble. on some days. Other days he'll look fine, right? And so that's tough. And then Riley Reif is just getting destroyed. Like, he's just getting crushed by Everson Griffin. So don't know what to do with that information.
Is it better than being launched like a human lawn dart like Brian O'Neill?
Right. Yeah. I would say yes, it is. But also, if Everson is a 30 sack a year kind of guy this year, then Riley Reif doesn't look so bad.
I mean, there's that.
So, yeah, who knows?
Yeah, let's go to the defense. And let's talk about the corners and the three technique and how that's going.
Yeah, the cornerback stuff is interesting because, like, it's very clear that Holton Hill is just in the doghouse. Like, he's just running with the threes and that's it. Chris Boyd has not made Coach Zimmer happy. I am prevented from quoting coaches when they are disciplining players. I can mention that a coach has pulled a player aside to coach them. So I will say that Zimmer has pulled Chris Boyd aside several times to coach him very vigorously on what sounds like the same points. So it's been a bit since Boyd has looked good, and he looked pretty poor in the night scrimmage the other day. He looked pretty poor today. So his ability to replace Holton Hill is not ideal. Holden looked great, which I guess is more sad news than anything else. Crap, right? I think Rhodes looks really good. I think Alexander looks really good. Wayne's, it's kind of hard to tell because, like, oh, you got burned by Stephon Diggs again. Okay, well, we'll see how that translates. I don't know.
Be like right around the time that he just stops. Right around the time that he just stops him all the time. Be like, oh, okay, so now you're an elite corner. How the hell did that happen?
Yeah, exactly.
You're biking at one hell of a grade.
But yeah, I would say after them, it's not beautiful. Nate Metters doesn't look great. I guess I haven't seen a ton of Bene Benwikere, the new corner, but he did get demolished in the night scrimmage the other day. It was also his first day with the Vikings, so I wouldn't read too much into it, but not a great debut for him.
So how about the three technique then?
Yeah, so from the chart that they released, it's very clear that Shamar Stephen is intended to be the starter. But in practices, Shamar Stephen hasn't really been rotating in. So we get to see a lot of Jalen Holmes or Hercules Mataafa at the three technique position. At the moment, I would say Holmes is probably ahead, but they are rotating who gets first-team reps between the two of them. They used to rotate it by day. Now they seem to be rotating it by drill. And so in one drill, Jalen Holmes is the starting three technique, and the other one is Hercules Mataafa. That's reflected in the depth chart, too, that Holmes is ahead of Mataafa. Holmes, I think, has looked better at the beginning of practice or the beginning of camp. I didn't really love what I was seeing. I think he's improved. Mataafa, a little bit of the opposite. He looked really great in the beginning. I wouldn't say he's gotten a lot worse or anything, but, it's clear kind of where his deficiencies are. And just today, it was very clear that he was having trouble kind of reading the play. He would burst into the backfield and attack the quarterback, and the quarterback had already handed the ball off and stuff like that. So that could be a part of the reason that he's kind of behind. And that's really it at the three technique position. Armin Watts is being played at the nose a lot more often. Curtis Cothran, I guess, is a nose tackle now. I don't really know kind of what's going on with him. Tito Adenabo might be the worst player in camp. He didn't win a single one-on-one rep. He's the only guy who has a one-on-one rep that I've logged. So that's not great. But yeah, that's kind of what's happening to the three technique position.
Is there anything else that we should discuss before we wrap up? Say how Dan Bailey is looking.
Yeah. So kicker analysis time. It's, I think, more difficult to evaluate Bailey than it normally is to evaluate a kicker because they're just screwing with him. They're just like, it's a different holder today, and you've got to deal with two different long snappers, and we're only going to have you kick in team drills when it's like an emergency situation, and they make the Mayday call, and the kicking team all has to run out once. You have to get the kick in under 7 seconds, and it's like...
I'm expecting him to only be able to kick in like one shoe, or you have a mouthful of cheesecake, and now try to make this field goal.
Right, yeah. It's like, can you make the field goal if we're hitting you with pool noodles? Like, I don't.
Marcus Sherrills could have done it.
Right. He's been disappointing, but like, there's a whole lot of context going on to he's been disappointing.
He's been disappointing, but with context.
Right. Right. Like, so for example, one day he goes 5 for 6. Well, the one he missed, Adam Thielen was the holder. What the hell, man? The other day he goes 5 for 6. Well, the one he missed, Chad Beebe was the holder. What the hell, man? It's weird. He's missed a kick in team drills every single day. That's alarming. And sometimes it's with, Kevin McDermott as the long snapper and Matt Weil as the holder. He doinked one today, just like that. And I think he doinked one at the night scrimmage, just like that. He should be used to that. So, that's not easy to parse out, right? But if those are the only 2 kicks he would have missed in a normal, long snapping holding battery, then he's set for a great season. But now we don't really have the ability to really evaluate, where he is because they keep just changing his situation.
So is this just sort of like Zimmer trying to keep the kicking? I say kicking woes like in-house, like we don't know what if he's doing a great job or if he's having a bad job. We just keep throwing him into awkward situations and try to make sure that he's comfortable. We don't know if he's going to be able to kick. And like meanwhile, he knows like Dan Bailey is having the yips too. He's like, no, I will punish you for every day you continue to have the yips.
Right. No, if the staff had come out and said something, then we'd be worried. But they haven't said anything.
No one has fully endorsed him as kicker yet.
Well, I mean, honestly, no one's asked, right? So they haven't had a reason to be like, who knows?
Arif next press conference. Question, is Dan Bailey your kicker moving forward?
Right, yeah.
Mike Zimmer just looks at you with a turned head. What?
Excuse me? It's probably worth asking, hey, are you concerned about some of the missed kicks? But for now, it's just like, I don't know.
Well, that's as good an answer as any on how he's doing. Let's wrap up training camp stuff and talk about the game coming up. There's an actual game. It's week 1 of the preseason against New Orleans, which means Teddy Bridgewater. So we can finally actually answer the question of how does Teddy look. Obviously, New Orleans and their 3rd and 4th stringers will be playing this particular game. And Teddy Bridgewater is expected to have a large amount of snaps. Do you think there's going to be any surprises as to who's going to end up playing for the Vikings this week?
That'll be interesting. I would expect both, sets of 3 techniques to play. I wouldn't expect that much from one series from the first team. I wouldn't expect that much from even the rookie center. I wouldn't expect that to happen. Maybe we'll see a lot of Irv Smith because he's kind of a little bit behind in terms of learning the offense. So giving him more reps might be smart. Plus, maybe you just don't want to have Kyle Rudolph up there anyway, and you don't have David Morgan, so there's not a ton of tight ends left. I think that we'll see maybe more Irv Smith than you normally expect from a second string tight end, which is what he is while David Morgan is injured. I think we'll see a lot of Beebe and Taylor. I think they want to resolve that question. I don't know that there's going to be anyone who will be surprised see play. It would be a surprise, I guess. Surprised to see a ton of play from. I expect a lot of play from Afadi at second defensive end, maybe a little bit less from Stephen Weatherly because they kind of know who they have with him. Obviously there's not going to be Linval, so we might see a lot of Jaleel Johnson play nose like through a couple of quarters. I couldn't tell you what would surprise me because it would be a surprise.
Well, that's about as honest an answer as we can get, I suppose. How do you feel about Bridgewater? I know the question had been asked of Zimmer about Bridgewater throwing passes and trying to hit him. It is going to be a little bit awkward to be playing against Bridgewater like this.
Probably, yeah. A lot of the players know him, but I think that this is just something they've gotten used to in football. They've played against a lot of their college teammates that they were in the same locker room for like 3-4 years. If they had been called upon to play against Case, they probably would have done it pretty easily. So it's probably going to be a tiny bit odd, but only for a little bit. Players play against former teammates from friends all the time, so they'll probably figure it out. Even though Bridgewater was kind of a more central piece to the locker room than many other former teammates and stuff like that. I don't know. It'll be interesting. I kind of want Bridgewater to play well.
And I suppose the other quarterback that we can expect to see from the Saints is the third quarter, like the number 3 quarterback, the one that they plug into like all scenarios, the one who might also be a field goal kicker too.
Right. Yeah. The fullback / H-back / wide receiver / field goal kicker / punt protector.
He might have been a water boy for like a couple of games.
It makes sense.
It's entirely possible. Dude is a utility.
Yeah, so the Saints don't have a fourth quarterback right now, so we'll see a lot of Teddy, we'll see a lot of Taysom Hill, and that's actually going to be a good test because you've got a pocket quarterback like Teddy to play against, and then later on you'll be playing against kind of a running quarterback, so that'll be good.
And Taysom Hill's no slouch. He is useful wherever they seem to plug him in, and it almost seems like he's an heir apparent to Breeze whenever Breeze decides to hang it up. But they have such a good backup in Bridgewater that it's kind of hard. Or do you feel like with Taysom Hill that it's one of those things that they are reluctant to bring him above QB, bring him up to QB2, or is it just because they can use him in so many places they prefer to have him lower on the depth chart?
Yeah, I think that if he were the heir apparent, it would be clear to Teddy, and he wouldn't have re-signed with him because he had free agency and he was about to sign with Miami and then decided to sign with the Saints. So I think that they actually do want Teddy to be the heir to Drew Brees. I'll say that Taysom Hill exists because he provides immediate value, not necessarily because he provides kind of a long-term quarterback value.
Do you think he's like a better version of a Joe Webb sort of situation?
Yeah, I think so. I think, he's like a better thrower. His arm is maybe not as strong, and he's maybe not quite the athlete, which is not an insult to his impressive athleticism, but rather a recognition that however good an athlete you thought Joe Webb is or was, you're wrong. He's actually better. He's a better athlete than Michael Vick. He's incredible. But yeah, I would say that Taysom Hill kind of fits on the Joe Webb, maybe Tim Tebow, but he can throw kind of spectrum.
He's Tim Tebow, but can excel at the position that he was meant to play.
Right. Yeah. And he is willing to play it.
Well, I mean, there's that. Let's go over to the mailbag. And the first question is from Zen Cupid, who asks, what are the chances that the Texans take out all of the Packers roster during their joint practices prior to the regular season schedule?
That would be fun.
It's an excellent question. Did you see J.J. Watt on a bike today? That was pretty great.
That was pretty great. I mean, he's like from Wisconsin, sort of. I mean, entirely, but also sort of. So he must have been dreaming about doing something like that for a while.
That was pretty cool. Question, Vikings Wales asks, what will end up being the Vikings' Achilles heel this season? Also, who apart from Cousins can we least afford to lose to an Achilles heel? Well, Achilles injury anyway.
So who will end up being the Vikings' Achilles heel? The easiest answer is probably Dan Bailey, so I'll probably try a more interesting answer. Let's go with Pat Elflein. That one's, I think, very believable. I
was actually going to go O'Neal, so yeah, that makes sense.
All right, and then who apart from Cousins can we least afford to lose to an Achilles injury? Geez, probably a receiver, because I think if you lose a defender, you've got at least kind of one level of depth at most of these positions that you're not going to get. Like, it's going to suck, but you're not going to get hurt too much. I think Diggs is better. So Diggs, sure.
Eddie the Dog asks, will the Vikings be participants in the flurry of small ball depth trades around roster cutdowns this year?
Will they trade for AJ Jefferson? Yeah, sure. Yes. Yep.
Well then, next question is from Casey Heiger, who asks, first, did the 2018 season quote-unquote end with missed field goals against Green Bay and Everson Griffin's hotel incident, etc.? And number two, is this team able to deal with things like that?
So if they hadn't missed field goals against Green Bay and if Everson Griffin had been healthy all season, would they have made the playoffs? Probably. They were incredibly close, right? And so in that case, small things might turn a tie into a win, for example, right? Or or even a loss into a win because some of these games were really close. So yes, because they would have been able to qualify then. How substantial is it? Generally speaking, not, I think, as substantial as people think. Everson only really had one good game after he returned. That was against the Lions. And I don't even remember his statistics. I just remember him moving really well. But yeah, that's an interesting question. Can the team deal with that this year? I expect the offense to improve. I just shat on Kirk for a little bit early in the show, but I do expect the offense to improve kind of despite that. And so having that capability to kind of win in multiple ways is really how you have the ability to deal with we can make a field goal because in that case, maybe you'll be up 6 instead of down 1, right? Just because you've got kind of a more multi-capable way of dealing with different opponents. So I'm going to say yes, this year's team should be able to deal with it. I also think they're a playoff team, which I guess a lot of people don't agree with. I think Vegas doesn't agree with it. So I think that it's a relatively solid team.
You could argue that the team, the season really ended right around either the losses to the Bills or the losses to the Rams. The Rams were going to be a really big team, and the Vikings just got the snot kicked out of them. But the Bills game was just so furious of this team is supposed to be destined for this great season. What the hell was that?
It's demoralizing. The locker room was just
incredibly so.
Yeah, the locker room was just silent. Teams are always embarrassed when they lose, but the biblical amounts of shame in that locker room, just because you never say, "Oh, that's a bad team," but they were all "It's the Bills, and that guy can't throw." What? It was
reminded me a little bit of the loss to Tim Tebow, and just
oh my god, I remember that.
Just wow, that happened.
Well, at least with that one, Tim Tebow had already been on a miraculous run of comeback victories, so it's just we were next, I guess.
when the TV movie of this comes out,
right, Well, when that happens, who's that Bears running back that ran out of the end zone? Marion Barber. When that happens, probably Marion Barber is directed by an angel to run out of the end zone or out of the sideline.
It was some form of divine intervention.
Yeah.
That is, if I know anything about that, the throw over in the playoffs to beat the Steelers,
that's directly angels in the outfield. They just came down and guided the ball.
Exactly. That's the only way that works in my in my head is an angels in the outfield sort of situation there. Kenneth Allen asks, thoughts on the new video about Cousins from Brett Coleman?
Yeah, we discussed this actually last week before the video came out, that I anticipated the video to kind of drop a lot of blame on the offensive line. Which I didn't entirely agree with. There was a fair amount of that, but really the style of the video actually went in a different direction. It went through the 6 quote-unquote biggest games that the Vikings lost and tried to divine whether or not it was Cousins' fault that, the Vikings lost those games. And he only laid the blame down in one of those games, and it was the first Chicago game, which, yeah, sure. It's not like I entirely blame him for the Los Angeles game. He could have played better, but generally speaking, he wasn't quote unquote at fault. And so, I would argue that the video kind of suffers from a focus on big moments and whether or not those big moments in those big games that went the wrong way were on Kirk. And then it emphasized some of the great positives that Cousins has as a quarterback. But I think one thing that the video misses is the moments that never occurred. And that has been kind of the criticism of Cousins, that he can't create situations that allow you to win games. And some of these, like he's focusing on this moment in the Saints game. Like he mentions the Adam Thielen fumble, and like, yeah, clearly not Cousins' fault. Fair. But like, and he actually, even after the Saints game, the piece I wrote was the Vikings played so well in this game. They've demonstrated they're a playoff team. I know they lost, but they played so well. But so I don't want to like underplay my immediate reaction to that game because I thought there was a lot more positives than negatives. But I will say, like, he's talking about kind of the final moments of the Saints game, and he's ignoring that like there's like this 9 minutes left, the Vikings get the ball back, and they take like 7 minutes off the clock to score. Like, yeah, it's good to score, but if you end the game in the process, like that's not great for you. And I think that was a result of a series of decisions that were necessarily too conservative. So the video is very good because it gives you a lot of ideas about kind of how we evaluate games and quarterbacks and kind of what you should expect quarterbacks to do. I think it's instructive in that way. Like a lot of Coleman's videos are very good. But I don't really agree with a lot of the ways that he comes about the conclusions he makes, and then also the conclusions he makes. The last Bears game that the Vikings played, yeah, I don't know that I could, were I to parse out blame, percentage by percentage, I would not put him at number one, right? I would say that the entire defense playing poorly is probably a good one, but it's not like he played well in that game, right? And so if you take a look at, did he play well as the metric as opposed to whose fault is it? Because, if someone deserves more blame, like in the Rams game, it's clearly the late schematic adjustments by the Vikings. That's clearly the quote unquote the fault, right? And Cousins actually played pretty well in that game. But just, as an example, that's like not great because like, look at the Bills game, which I don't remember if that was included in his analysis. A lot of Vikings played really poorly in that game, like unquestionably, right? Anthony Barr had a bunch of bad moments, and Eric Kendricks played really poorly, and there was a lot of miscommunication between the nickel and the outside corner, whether or not it was, Mackenzie Alexander in there or not, and just some broken plays and stuff like that. But like the offense was bad, and the throwing was bad. It wasn't primarily the reason. But quarterbacks have to dig you out of situations where somebody else puts you in a bad situation, especially if you're paying them, a high level or high tier money to the point where you can't afford cap space in other areas. So fault is one approach that only gives you part of kind of the context of the picture. And fault isn't very good because I don't really judge quarterbacks by wins anyway. And so if I'm like, hey, Cousins only won 8 games last year, and you said those games weren't his fault, that would be like an appropriate response. But if I said Cousins didn't play very well on the whole last year, and then you say, well, the games they lost weren't his fault, that's like not really a response, right? If you're an average quarterback, then the games where you lose are not usually your fault anyway. But that's because you're an average quarterback. You wouldn't be losing those games if you were an above average quarterback, and you would definitely be losing those games if you were below average quarterback. And the issue with Cousins is that he's being paid like a well above average quarterback, and so he can't dig the team out of situations that it finds themselves in, and that's kind of what he's being paid to do. So, one of the things like the offensive line, for example, again, if you improved his clean pocket rate, like if you decreased his pressure rate to be league average, and then you did that to every other quarterback, right? So if you adjust for the fact that the Vikings were under pressure more than almost any other team in the league last year, like they're like 29th, 30th or something like that, right? If you adjust for all of that and then prorate his clean pocket numbers and his pressure numbers to those situations, they rise from like 15th in efficiency to 12th. Like, great. Well, now that we've essentially removed in some ways the offensive line from the equation and how poor it played, he still was like the 12th best quarterback. Like, that's not phenomenal. So I disagree with the conclusions of Coleman's video, but I'm not saying that the video was poorly done.
Well, yes, but if you were looking at it like that, and you were able to take, like, say, their targets out of the equation, do you think that Matt Stafford is a better value than Kirk Cousins at this point with how much he's being paid?
Well, so Stafford is being paid just a little bit less than Cousins, so their value is almost identical in terms, or the cost, the liability is almost identical in those terms. With if it's a tie between how good they are, Stafford is a slightly better value. When I voted in the All NFC North team, I put Cousins ahead of Stafford. I think that Stafford maybe does a better job of digging you out of situations where you're in bad spots, and Cousins does a better job of keeping you even keeled, and if you're a good team, you're not in those situations in the first place. Whereas the Lions have been a bad team, and he's done a good job kind of digging them out because he can kind of turn it on, or rather unleash it. I don't like to say turn it on late in games because I think that quarterback response to situational football has more to do with approach than it does with an inherent ability to elevate talent. I would say that Stafford has the right approach for those situations, but that Cousins is snap to snap a better quarterback. So I would say Cousins is probably a better value, just because I think he's a little bit of a better quarterback. Should be noted, all three of the other NFC North ballots that were turned in had Stafford above Cousins.
So basically you're viewing him as the Target brand as opposed to the Walmart brand.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, he's the Archer Farms as opposed to the Good Value. What's the Walmart brand? Maybe it's just Walmart.
Yeah, might as well be. All right, next question is a fun one. Assuming Holton makes the 53rd this season, going into free agency, or more likely draft due to the cap situation, does cornerback become a higher priority in a just-in-case sense due to his disciplinary concerns moving forward? If so, how much?
I wish I didn't just always say it depends to these kinds of questions, but it depends because the contract situations for both Mackenzie Alexander and Trey Waynes are kind of dire, right? Because they're both in the final year of the contract. They're both about to hit free agency. The Vikings are really phenomenal at finding ways to keep the team together. I don't see how they can do it, but I also didn't see how they would be able to keep Barr at $13 million. And then also like sign an extension for Rudolph, which admittedly is more of a cap saving extension than anything else. But if they re-sign both Waynes and Alexander, then no, I don't think so. If they lose one of them, which I think Waynes will command a higher market value, so they might lose Waynes. Let's say they lose Waynes. So now your starter is probably Holton Hill. And then you've got, or Mike Hughes. Oh my God, I completely forgot about Mike Hughes. So now your starter is Mike Hughes. Now you've got one backup to Holton Hill. And then you've also got Chris Boyd, who needed to be pulled aside to be coached today. I would say that you would create middle of the roster type competition, not second round pick type competition. And the Vikings, they consistently disagree. Like they invest in cornerbacks. So I personally would say that that's kind of a mid-round situation where you can develop a successor to Xavier Rhodes at the same time you're developing competition for the backup spot to Mike Hughes. If they lose both, it's definitely a priority.
His other question is, what's the best cheeseless game day food outside of wings? Mozzarella is fine, I suppose.
Cheeseless game day food. So I guess jalapeno poppers don't count.
I was actually just thinking like chips.
Chips are good.
I wanted to say Cheez-Its because you and I are both on board with brand name junk food, but I think
I love Cheez-Its so much, man.
They're so good. I think chips is the appropriate answer.
Mini tacos made this for the Super Bowl 2 years ago using actually also last year, but a different kind of taco. Using a slow roasted chuck roast as the meat. You don't have to put cheese on tacos. I mean, I'd prefer it, but like you don't have to, right? So
it insists upon itself. It insists upon having having cheese on it, though. You can have a taco without cheese, but would you want to?
I think you can have a complete taco experience sans cheese. You just have to work real hard at it.
Did you just say a complete taco experience?
Yes. I'm not backing down from that. That's the argument or the phrase.
That's the complete taco experience is also the name of your food truck book.
Oh my God, yes.
Grant McMasters asks, should the Vikings extend any of the upcoming 2020 UFAs, Weatherly, Alexander, Curse, Harris, etc.? And what would an extension for the guys look like?
Weatherly, which I think on the Zone Coverage Football Machine podcast, Sam a couple weeks ago went over what a Weatherly contract extension would look like. If you do it now, you have the ability to sign him to, like $6 million a year, and that could end up looking pretty good. I think that fans tend to overrate Weatherly's performance last year, but obviously he's like better than your average defensive end backup. But Weatherly, I think, makes sense. Harris makes a ton of sense. He's the first guy I would lock up. And I would sign him to an Andrew Sendejo contract, which after cap extension is probably $5 million a year, as opposed to the $4 million a year that they signed Sendejo for. So do that and then reap the benefits of underpaying your labor. If I could speak like a football capitalist for a second.
This seems to fly in the face of everything you believe in, but okay.
I talk about the draft. That flies in the face that you shouldn't be able to determine the direction of labor. They should be able to choose themselves. Also, the Vikings should draft.
If only the rookies were able to control the means of production. And then,
right. But yeah, from the perspective of management, the capital owners, if you will, I would say that Hurst is the priority. Weatherly makes sense, but I think he's more of a backup than a starter, or kind of like in that in-between role. And maybe he could get even better this year. That's kind of what a lot of people are projecting when they're talking about extending him. We'll say Everson Griffin has looked really friggin' good in camp, so maybe he's got more than a year left. Curse, first of all, he keeps interacting with me on Twitter, which is great. Second,
one of the questions from Kyle Slaby is, have you apologized to Curse yet?
Actually, I was planning on talking to him today and seeing if he would bring it up, but he went to the locker room too quickly. Not, I think, to avoid media, but just because some players do that and some players don't.
He's ducking you. He's clearly dodging you.
That would be very difficult. He's 6'5".
Wow.
But
so you're saying he doesn't see you?
Yeah, that might be it. Which, by the way, Curse is having like a pretty good camp, relatively speaking. He just got toasted by PB on that play that he was like, "Come on, man." Alexander, I would want to extend him. The cornerback market might be a little weird for him. It's weird, right? Because he's coming off of an excellent second half of the season. That is exactly what happened to Trey Waynes. The difference is that Trey Waynes has had another year of control because he's a first round pick, so you could just option him and then figure it out from there. But yeah, so Alexander, might the Vikings fans are so used to this, where a cornerback has like a bad couple of years and then becomes fantastic, right? Because Rhodes did that, Waynes did that. I guess kind of Josh Robinson did that until Brandon Marshall snatched his soul. But yeah,
Mortal Kombat style in the middle of the field. Yeah.
Yeah, it was brutal. It's illegal. Honestly, they should throw him in jail.
There ought to be a law.
There ought to be a law. But yeah, so we're just like used to seeing cornerbacks put together a good back half to the season and then following it up by just being really good. And I gotta say, that's like not normal. That doesn't happen on other teams or often. So I would say it's difficult for Alexander. So I can understand waiting on that contract. Harris, just do it. So that's my thoughts on that.
All right. Ben Brown Plum asks, and I'm going to mess up his name again, and I don't care. What are the Vikings going to do with the embarrassment of riches they have at tight end? How can one possibly choose between Gronklin and Hikatuni? Could they carry 5 tight ends?
Hey, man, Brandon Dillon killed it today. Don't forget, what are someone in practice called him the Marion Flash, because he's from Marion, a college in Indianapolis. He had a great play today. And the other players were all very excited about it, which is, like, nice to see. That sounded sarcastic. It's not. Like when Eric Wilson returned a pick 6 in camp last year and, like, half the team came over to celebrate, like, I was like, oh, people really like Eric Wilson. That's really cool. People might really like Brandon Dillon. So, yeah, who knows? They're all good now, and we should be happy. There's too many good tight ends. It's going to be a 6 tight end offense somehow. Maybe make Brian O'Neill play some tight end because they're all so good. No,
that ends up being the secret to his career, huh? We're moving Brian O'Neill from offensive line to tight end. We're just going to try that for a bit.
Yeah, well, I mean, he did it in high school. He should do it now. No, Tyler Conklin has improved in camp. Mike Zimmer's mentioned that a lot, twice, which is a lot for him. And he's caught a lot of interesting red zone passes, and he's looked better as a blocker. So great. That's cool, but also Cole Hikatini has been looking really good in camp, like really good. Like, I think he looks like the best blocker, which I guess would be more meaningful if David Morgan was healthy. But now it's just like, oh, you're the best blocker between 3 receiving tight ends. Like, fantastic. But he's looked pretty good. And I thought he's done a lot to get open, which is great. I mean, the Vikings were in a pseudo bidding. It's hard to say a bidding war when it's like, you know, you've got all these players on like $700,000 to $30 million contracts, and the bidding war is like, yeah, we're the ones that'll pay him $100,000. But they were in a bidding war with San Francisco with him over who gets to sign him to the practice squad, and the Vikings won. So they obviously value him, and I thought he looked good. And then Brandon Dillon looks good. I don't know if they're both eligible for the practice squad, which is entirely possible. The Vikings could carry 2 tight ends on their practice squad, which I don't think I've seen before, but would be kind of cool because I think that they're both pretty talented and have a lot of potential. So the tight ends look good. Even Kyle Rudolph looks good. I say even because even Kyle Rudolph. Well, it's just, you know, I'm supposed to hate him, right? That's the thing. I hate him.
Maybe you're just jealous of his athleticism. That's
got to be it. I'm so jealous of his athleticism. All I can do is insult him. But he's played so well in camp. Even I cannot.
Even he has managed to melt your cold, frozen heart.
Yeah, but no, he's looked good. I haven't seen him in a ton of blocking situations, or rather, I haven't broken down the video I have on him in blocking situations. So I can't say much there. I will say that Anthony Barr has destroyed him in pass protection, but like. That doesn't mean much to me. I don't really care about that much.
That should almost be expected at this point. Bill Botke asks, have an interesting question for you guys. Given the Vikings are having trouble finding a good backup receiver, are there any cheap free agents who might have something left in the tank? While all these guys have issues, some of the possibilities are Michael Crabtree, who was just signed today. Brandon,
probably like minutes after Botke sent this email, too. I feel bad.
Brandon Marshall, Pierre Garçon, who would just like to play anywhere. Des Bryant, and Kelvin Benjamin. Thanks for the great show.
Yeah, so in preparation for the show, I did some heavy research. I Googled Pierre Garçon.
You Googled the squiggle.
Yeah, I Googled the squiggle. I actually did not type the squiggle in, but Google, they auto-filled the squiggle for me, which is great. There's a name for that. I'm confident the French have a name for it. Well, I refuse to learn it.
Why? The squiggle is more fun.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And the first article that popped up was Pierre Garçon would love to be a New York Giant. And I was like, well, that's interesting. Why would he just single out the New York Giants? So I click on the article, and it's just a Giants reporter, reaches out to him, right? Because the Giants have a couple of injuries in practice with their starting receivers, like Golden Tate and Sterling Shepard are both injured. And it's not like they're going to re-sign Brandon Marshall. So they're boned, right? And Daniel Jones is like throwing to like me out there. It's brutal. Also, Eli Manning is there for some reason. And so they reach out to veteran receiver Pierre Garçon, like, hey, would you like to be a Giant? And he said, oh, yeah, I would love to be on any team that offers me a contract. It was very clear. He was like, are they, why, do you know something?
Like, what I'd really like to do is play in the NFL. Can I play in the NFL? Because that's what I really want to do.
And the headline, like, it's great. The headline's not wrong, right? He would love to be a New York Giant or any of the 31 other teams.
I would love to catch catches I'd love to catch catches from Cam Newton.
Right. Yeah, sure. Why not?
That seems almost as accurate.
Right. So that was funny. So he's available, very available. He is swiped right on everybody. Did I do that right? Am I one of the kids these days? Great.
I'm going to plead the fifth on all of that. I told enough stories at the New York taping that I don't need to continue with any of that.
I would say probably Garçon, who had I want to say 700 some yards last year, not as interested in Brandon Marshall, Des Bryant, or Kelvin Benjamin. Not because I hate 6'2" to 6'5" receivers. Are they all 6'4", 6'5"? Not because I hate giant people, although I have reason to, James.
I've done nothing wrong.
But just because I don't think any of them have anything left in the tank, and I think Garçon does. But yeah, that's it. I would have been ecstatic about Michael Crabtree. I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, I think, in a different episode, that Michael Crabtree would have been the top of my list. But Arizona signed him. And interesting note, so he's one of the best receivers college football has ever had. And he was playing for Texas Tech for the air raid system. That's the system that Cliff Kingsbury runs in Arizona. They did not overlap. Cliff Kingsbury was at Texas Tech, but it's the same system. So I just found that kind of interesting.
Yeah, it goes to show somebody might actually sign somewhere for a reason other than money, maybe.
Yeah, right. Well, I assume that he didn't have a ton of suitors, but yeah.
Yeah. Question from Mick, who asks, if you had to watch every Vikings game this season with a Packers fan or a Saints fan, which would you pick? And no, it can't be a specific one or just a random fan from those fan bases. That is such crap. I have a good friend who is a Saints fan who is not an ass about it. He was a Saints fan back during the Jim Bob days when they had
when they had the bags.
Well, yeah, when they had two backup quarterbacks that were both named Jim Bob.
I can't get over that. That's a true story. That's real. You can find that out on Pro Football Reference. I found that out on my own. Wow.
I much prefer watching football games with him as opposed to my ex, who is a rabid Packers fan. So,
you don't want to watch football games with your ex?
No,
Crazy.
not particularly. I mean,
I have an ex who's a Packers fan too, and I would not want that.
No. Not in the least.
I'll say I'm going to go. This is the problem. I think that the range is wider on Packers fans. I think you're more likely to get someone who's more obnoxious, at least in my experience, than the more obnoxious range of Saints fans. Which, let me be clear, the most obnoxious of any fan base is incredibly obnoxious, except for you guys, Vikings fans.
Cheers.
Yeah, skull. That was so condescending. I'm sorry, guys. But I think the top range, in my experience, has been that the more tolerable Packers fans are more tolerable than the more tolerable Saints fans. And maybe it's just because I've met a wider range of people who are Packers fans, so I assume the sample is wider. But also, I think the Packers have a larger fan base, so that could be it too. So I'm going to pick the Packers because I'm an optimist, as you all know.
Yeah, I remember the season of optimistic Arif and how that lasted 3 weeks.
But the hope is
Pepperidge Farm remembers.
The hope is that I'll find someone who is willing to talk football in calm, even terms, and not blame me for Aaron Rodgers' fragile collarbone or whatever.
I'm not.
Plus, I don't want to hear about the pass interference thing.
No, you can listen to the pass interference thing and laugh.
Well, I mean, yeah, but my inherent defensive response is to talk about the the 2009 NFC Championship game, which is just like a self-own. Like, why would, like, you bring that up? You're like, oh, it was unfair for you. Well, here's a game that was unfair. It happened during your magical Super Bowl winning season. I want to bring that up.
I still think I would prefer a Saints fan just because, and I don't know if it's just just like the further, maybe it is just the further away from Green Bay you are, the worse like of a Green Bay Packers fan you become, because you feel like you have to become a peacock of some kind and like have to represent.
Be sure to tell Justice that.
Oh, the further away from Green Bay you are geographically, the worse fan you become. I don't know what it is. North Dakota Green Bay fans especially are incredibly obnoxious, and the Saints fans I have met haven't been terrible. Although I think we both can agree that that Philadelphia Eagles fans can just right off.
Oh, yeah, I would pick a Packers fan or a Saints fan way ahead of an Eagles fan.
Yeah, not even...
That's saying that as somebody who hosts, again, a weekly podcast with an Eagles fan.
Yeah, well, that's your misfortune. But the... Not dismissing the podcast. I'm just dismissing his fanhood. That's all.
Well, the podcast is pretty sad, too.
Okay.
Give it a listen, guys.
If my experience with Saints fans has been better... for the most part, so I would probably go in that direction, but I can't do anything else there. Brian Jellerson asks, question for James: who on the roster do you think could beat up Wayne from Letterkenny in a fight? Boy, the toughest guy in Letterkenny. I'm not entirely sure who's the toughest Viking.
It's gotta be Linval. He got shot.
Linval was my first choice, but. Boy.
Okay, Kevin McDermott has the highest toughness rating on Madden. Like a 99, like no one's better.
I'm pretty sure that if Wayne from Letterkenny was in Madden this year, he'd manage to like break the toughness meter. Pretty sure he would actually find a way to, like, you just see the infinity symbol on there. Like, what the, really? It's like Aaron Donald in strength. Boy, my first my gut instinct says Linval, but I think even Linval would end up being laid out.
That's cowed.
That's rough. That is rough. You really do need to watch Letterkenny if you haven't had a chance. There's at this point there's no. The fiance and I were talking yesterday as they were going through like some like Letterkenny slang from the hockey players, and we recognized nearly every single one of them because of our proximity to Canada. Whether it was watching like the CBC shows or just because of like hockey being such an important part of the high school that we went to, like that she went to, and then I went to the different one. But yeah, it was just like, yeah, we knew what all of these slang meant. Oh no.
Wait, are you dating someone who went to Central High School?
Yes.
Oh my God.
Marrying, in fact.
I can't believe you.
Yeah, well. I don't know what to tell you. The wedding's like literally next door to there, but we'll talk about that later. Kyle Segal asks, how do I make this pain go away? I assume he's hungover. So if he's hungover, there's a wonderful video that Sean Evans from Hot Ones did with Bert Kreischer, with Bert Kreischer, that has all sorts of fantastic remedies for the hangovers. Menudo was a winner along with something with something that had a hell of a lot of hot sauce on it. I can't seem to remember.
Crazy that they came up with a solution involving hot sauce. Who could have seen that coming?
I know, right? How could First We Feast, which features the show Hot Ones, use something involving hot sauce? Darn shame. It wasn't one of theirs, if I remember correctly. Roundy Mass asks, my friend Nick thinks Laquan Treadwell is our third best wide receiver. Have you ever had a friend whose constant contrarian takes border on purposeful ignorance? And how did you go about explaining to them that it was becoming harmful to your relationship?
Buddy, you gotta leave. You can't harm yourself by being in these friendships.
Yeah, otherwise you're going to end up in like some sort of an intervention program with the guy and be like, we're all here and we all care about you. You need to stop talking about Laquan Treadwell like he's actually like he's the next George Kittle. Like, That ship sailed at least 2 years ago. We're done here. We love you. You need to stop.
You got to stop.
Slider6643 asks, best animated film ever, and why is it The Iron Giant?
The Iron Giant's really good, man. And it's crazy. Everyone calls it like one of the most underrated films of all time. And unlike in football, when you start doing that with a player, they don't become overrated by becoming, or they become overrated by becoming underrated. I don't think that's happened to The Iron Giant. I think it's still underrated, despite everyone being like, yeah, it's the most underrated film. An underrated film that I think no one talks about as underrated is Titan AE. I feel like I'm the only person who's ever seen it.
No, you are definitely not. I used to get... well, that was going to be a lot more personal information than you need to see, but I would see that movie often post high school in a. It was always hazy whenever I was driving over to see the movie, but I saw that movie at least 20 times, and no, I fully enjoyed that. I fully enjoyed that quite a bit. I actually watched that fairly recently because I discovered it was on HBO Now, and
did it hold up, or did you have to listen to some more Creed?
There's never a bad time for that. Why would that? Why are you making fun of? Why would you make fun of Creed? I actually watched Titan AE fairly recently, and it wasn't terrible. It held up fairly well. It was above average, not as good as I remember it, but when I was seeing it, like, there were trails for my fingers, so I can't, like, I can't really say at that point, but we're just gonna move on and not talk about.
Sure, I'll say Treasure Planet was really good. Crazy movie that no one talks about. It's tough to be like, yeah, I think Lion King, right?
No, Emperor's New Groove. It has to be Emperor's New Groove.
Oh, okay. Actually, that might be it.
It's Cusco's
I was gonna
Poison.
say Lion King is incredible, but it's very difficult because everyone's been exposed to it so often that it's become the standard. Kind of like Toy Story, which is very good too. But like Lion King is so good. But yeah, Emperor's New Groove is like great. It's like the best David Spade performance. Which, if you've seen the worst of David Spade, doesn't sound like very much at all because his lows are just awful.
His lows are pretty bad, but when he in like Tommy Boy or to a lesser extent Black Sheep, that's not bad.
Yeah. But this was his best one.
Clearly.
It's great.
Don from Ohio says, dear haters of Kyle Sloter, are your lives so miserable that you must slander the greatest quarterback in Vikings history? Or is Arif still upset with me because of his terrible Fran Tarkenton take from a few weeks ago?
Yeah, so the terrible take was actually Don's because he doesn't think Fran was that good of a quarterback. It's an insane take. But no, Slutter has not been doing well.
And his follow-up question, dear Arif and Shana Na, are funnel cakes the go-to dessert when you go to the fair/festival?
My girlfriend hates funnel cakes. I don't get it.
I don't think I've had a good funnel cake before.
What?
I don't think I've had a good funnel cake before. There's two things in my life that I know for certain about food.
Then you
like
just
that.
Don't like funnel cakes because they're all fairly even in quality. So
I was gonna say, I don't think I've had a good scone before in my life, and I don't think I've had a good funnel cake.
I think legitimately I haven't really had a good scone. So I think that's on whoever has served me scones and not on scones. So I look forward to the first good scone. I don't think that there's a problem with scones.
I feel like that's something we should have done in New York. It was like, all right, we both feel like scones are highly overrated. We have had nothing but stale crap from them over the years.
Right.
We have to spend like the next 3 hours of this day going through Brooklyn and finding a decent scone. And then when we fail, we have like material for a show.
Yeah, and then we could just be like, scones suck. 10 reasons why. But yeah, I mean, I don't think funnel cakes are the go-to dessert. For sure. I think they're good. I don't think they're great. And also, I haven't had them in years because my girlfriend hates them. Yeah, I really can't even choose that as an answer or I'll hurt myself.
I always go mini donuts. I don't feel like you can go terribly wrong with a mini donut as a dessert.
Mini donuts are great. It's been a while since I've had Dippin' Dots. I love like they're crazy overpriced, but I love Dippin' Dots, man. Like, it's just ice cream, but whatever.
But it's ice cream of the future. Why
Oh, yeah, sorry.
weird?
Yeah, you get to time travel in your mouth. That sounds weird. Well, let's keep it.
We're going to clip that for the year-end show. Along with this one, Numerophile asks, "Hello, sirs. Do you think the Vikings O-line would be able to protect my small children from the 30 to 50 wild hogs that sometimes attack them?"
For about 3 to 5 minutes, I think.
Is this sort of like the question of, like, how many fifth graders could you legitimately beat up in a fight if they just released wave after wave of 10 of them?
I think it's even more memey. I think it's 50 duck-sized horses or a horse-sized duck or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think it's that. Yeah, holy crap! What a meme. Okay, let's match up the entire Vikings offensive line to deal with a variable amount of wild hogs between the numbers 30 and 50.
Mm-hmm.
They don't get access to assault rifles.
Nope.
But they do get access to their own wits and strength and hard work.
And they can, let's just say, they can hold in this particular instance.
They can hold. They're allowed to hold.
They're not going to be called for the penalty.
Yeah. So I would say they could take 10, and I'm including the entire 90-man roster of offensive linemen. So all 15 or however many there are, 16. I think they could take 10 wild hogs. After that, sorry.
After that, I'm sorry, your kids are not going to make it.
Yeah.
Which is a lovely way to end this particular show. Arif, what would you like to plug?
Jesus. All right, bye, kids. No. Yeah, so I've got a couple of pieces at The Athletic, like I mentioned, the training camp guide, also the NFC North Pole. In a couple of days, I don't know, I'm going to be writing a piece on the offensive innovations I've seen from the Vikings that I particularly enjoy. I've already begun to write a little bit of that, and it's kind of cool. Also, Chad and I are going to collaborate on a post-game one 53-man roster as a means of talking about all these players in camp. So you'll see that very soon. And then I did mention a podcast I was doing with Ben Natan. If you actually are interested in my political takes, you can listen to the Wide Left podcast. We just recorded another episode, which means we've got 2 episodes in the past 2 weeks, and that means it's a regular podcast now.
Is that what that means?
Sure. We haven't recorded in 18 months before that, so.
Yeah, that is one hell of a hiatus. That's not just like we're not going to do anything for 5 weeks in the summer.
Right.
Sad. Well, that is going to be it for this episode. If you are interested in the Norse Code Football League, the Norse Code Fantasy Football League, rather, you can send an email to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com, or you can send a quick Twitter DM to norsecodedn. That is going to be it for this episode. We'll be back next week to talk about how the Saints game went and what we learned, if anything, about the wide receiver 3 battle. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening, and please remember that revenge is a dish best served funky as hell. And we'll see you next week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and co-host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at norsecodedn. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/norsecode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/norsecode. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can also be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.